Forward to hearing some experiments, perhaps.
I hope so.
Today you're writing more for the human voice, more operas. How do you respond to the technical challenge of writing an opera where the visual is as demanding as the oral?
I think that's why I like it. I got interested in opera, in the singing voice, and in theater just about the same time. And the fact that, Robert Bolt helped me a lot. He showed things on the screen that made the music more available. This was in a rock and roll cantata called The Civil War in 1968. And to be hearing a song about the death of a son and then to see the son on two film screens at the same time made the story complete in a way that I had not been able to do before, or even think of before.
Bill, you've written several multimedia works. Your Talking to the Sun is based on poetry and set to music. In it you use African chants, lullabies, and Indian verse. How was this music received?
Well, it was received very well. It was a very mixed idiom for me. Without hesitation, I used any style or procedure or thought that seemed appropriate to the 40 poems in the work. And I suppose one reason for that is I'm not so concerned about stylistic unity anyway, because I think those things pass. I mean, we don't know as clearly as people in Mozart's time which passage was Turkish and which passage was Viennese or which passage was influenced by the Mannheim Orchestra. I don't think that's so important. And then in a piece that's so diverse, I felt uninhibited and free to use whatever I felt like using.
You've written a beautiful chamber work, The Shepherd's Christmas. It's often compared to Menotti's Amal and the Night Visitors. Do you believe more should be done to expose children to not only American composers, but composers in general?
Well, composers in general, to music in general. I think children should be hearing music at a very early age and should be hearing good music. And by good music, I mean all good music. I don't mean merely Viennese classical music. And in fact, I'm not so sure about much American music, but I am sure that children should hear things of quality. And if I were to fault Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers, even, two programs that I think are very good and very important, it would be that the music is not as nice, as wonderfully worked out as it could be. Children deserve to hear music, and they can like music. We know they can. We've given children's concerts. I think it's desperately important that we get children listening to music of quality as soon as possible, because otherwise we're going to be in trouble.
The music critic Leonard Feather was an early admirer of yours. He said your music should be judged by the standards of concert music. Do you believe over the years that your work has been so demanding that critics could not categorize you?
I don't know whether demanding is the right word, but it certainly is true that critics have trouble writing about me. The classical critics feel that there's a jazz element even when I don't see it. It may very well be there. The vernacular is there somehow, and they're not qualified to talk about it. And the jazz critics feel that I'm using procedures that are beyond their ken. But the truth is that most jazz critics, that there are hardly any jazz critics who are as qualified as, say, Andrew Porter, who writes for the New Yorker, or Donald Francis Tobey, who wrote criticism in England in the 19th century. But it does complicate the issue. And then I suppose there are some new critics coming along who can deal with music as music, but
You have written extensively for theater. Your productions have been seen off-Broadway in San Francisco, London, and many other locations. How capable are music critics to review your productions?
I didn't get that many reviews except in New York. And the problem between jazz and classical music in criticism is magnified even more because theater critics have to be able to make theatrical judgments that are sound and musical judgments that are sound. And I'm not sure whether there are people around who try to do that on a serious level, except somebody like Andrew Porter, who can write about opera from a knowledgeable standpoint.
There was an article in the Chicago Times magazine in which Dieter Kober, director of the Chicago Chamber Orchestra, said that, and I quote, "Bill Russo is one of the most significant persons in music in this city, a total practitioner, yet Chicagoans hardly know about him." Is public relations, politics, or reviews responsible for this phenomenon?
Well, I don't know whether it's true, but if it, insofar as it is true, there are lots of things involved. One is that I worked abroad in Rome and London and in New York a great deal. As a matter of fact, over the past 10 years or so, worked mostly more in New York than I have here. First. Second, Chicago tends to be tough on people here, or tends to think that they aren't here when they are here, even though everybody knows they're here. Am I making myself clear? Probably not. I mean to say that there are people around Chicago who are known. Saul Bellow certainly is known. And we have an extraordinary artistic community in Chicago, and I just think sometimes it isn't recognized, or people don't admit it, or people don't know it, and people want to say, well, he isn't recognized here. But I know a lot of people who know who I am. I'm happy as I can be.
In his movie Manhattan, Woody Allen wrote about some of the virtues that made life worth living. I'd like to quote him. "There are certain things, I guess, that make it worthwhile. They are in order: Groucho Marx, the baseball player Willie Mays, the second movement of the Jupiter Symphony, Louis Armstrong playing Potato Head Blues, Swedish films, Flaubert's A Sentimental Education, Marlon Brando, Frank Sinatra, Cezanne's Still Lifes, etc. What are some of the things in life that make life worth living for Bill Russo?"
Frank Sinatra, certainly. Peggy Lee, speaking about singers. Almost all of Verdi's middle works, especially Rigoletto, The Marriage of Figaro.
You once wrote that the purpose of your art is to assist in the creation of a better life. Do you feel you have fulfilled this purpose thus far?
I don't know whether I have created a better life, but I certainly have tried to do so. I mean, I certainly have written pieces that are consciously designed to elucidate, clear up, make things more understandable to all of us, and I have clearly avoided things that are merely reflections of my anguish or my pain, or of simply the disgust that we can find in life. I have avoided that.
What brings you pleasure or pain?
Well, music, I suppose, brings me great pleasure, especially the composers I mentioned, and performing music. I love to perform music. I love to compose music. Composing music is the pain and the pleasure. It's not easy to do, and it seems to be getting harder and harder. Am I becoming better at it, more demanding of myself? I don't know. Or am I losing something? I don't think I am. I think I am like many autodidactic composers, insofar as I am self-taught. I think I'm getting better. But I'm not satisfied as easily, and I rewrite a lot more than I used to. But the rewriting isn't the hard part. The hard part is the initial part, the vision, the starting it.
Who are your heroes?
Well, Duke Ellington, Socrates, Mozart.
A formidable list.
There are more living people. Well, Leonard Bernstein until recently. Mike Alexandrov, the president of Columbia College, is was a great hero. The vision, the breadth of vision, the understanding of the world that he's exhibited. And my best friend, Mel Bobich, who's a philosopher at the University of New Hampshire, probably the wisest person I know.
It's been written that our society has become desensitized by television, drugs, and loud music. Do you find this comment on modern life part of your experience as well?
I think people are less sensitive, less hearing, even less feeling. But then you see wonderful pockets of care and concern. You see endeavors. You see people who do care. You see people who believe, and it makes some of the desensitization, some of the lack of sensitivity seem less important. And some people are starting to think, listen, we should be changing things. We should be getting better, and maybe we are getting better.
Do you compose because you have to, you're driven, or possibly to achieve a small sense of immortality?
Well, if you're writing as well as you can and you're not being praised and stroked for it every day, and that's true of most of us, I suppose you have to concern yourself with what happens afterwards. Ellington said he wrote only for today. He told me once he didn't care anything about immortality. I'm not so sure he told the truth, though. He was a very veiled and complicated person. If you write pieces that you know are probably not going to be performed correctly in your lifetime, which is true of opera, it's so hard, complicated to get a good performance, so expensive, I suppose you have to hope that after you die, that piece will be played, that which you had to say will have some life. I mean, the truth of the matter is you can't evaluate any art while the people are living. It takes years and years and years to get a sense of it. So whether we want to or not, I think we are, all of us in composition and other arts, concerned about immortality.
Have you ever tried something that failed?
Oh, yes. If I failed in other kinds of work or in writing a piece, I can think of numerous pieces that have failed. I had the wrong idea about. I think I had the wrong idea about my orchestra in the 60s, as a matter of fact. I think I just didn't get it right. I'll never be a good swimmer. I could have been a great horseback rider.
In your vast library of music, there's been one element missing. Do you have plans to delve into your own ethnic and religious roots to compose a mass or a requiem?
Well, I did compose a requiem. It was done at Ravinia, as a matter of fact, in the 1960s, and I used Verdi's text minus the Dies Irae. I used his text because I didn't know how to get a text. I'm not that conversant with the Catholic Church and its texts, its words, it's the structure of a mass even. I think I probably will write a piece like that. I'm returning to the church in some form. I'm not sure what it is. I have been to Mass a couple of times in the last couple of years. I find it very replenishing and very important.
In Denmark, they have a program called Jazz Par, which promotes and recognizes jazz. Do Europeans take care of American art better than we Americans do?
Often, especially the art in America that we're perhaps insecure about recognizing, ice skating or ice dancing, jazz, concert bands, what used to be called musical comedy, musical theater works. The Europeans seem to be more appreciative of, because they can see the quality and the value in these things, perhaps from a distance more easily than we can close up.
The National Endowment for Arts spends barely an eighth of their budget on jazz. Your large-scale opera, Dubrovsky, includes a non-human cast of 2 bears and 50 dogs. How hard is it to get expensive, large-scale works produced, let alone endowed?
Well, as a matter of fact, Dubrovsky is an interesting. Dubrovsky is not a jazz work. It's an absolutely, I think it's an absolutely non-jazz work. Although I have a student a famous student in England, Patrick Gowers, and he uses my chords, and because he went to Cambridge and has a PhD and had all that wonderful English training, he uses my chords, my jazz chords, and they sound classical, and I use classical chords and they sound jazzistic, so I must admit that there's that probably is some unknown, unknowable aspect in my most non-jazz pieces that is jazz.